I'm wearing my Mad Max t-shirt today because we're almost in Mad Max times here. If you haven't seen the movies Mad Max and Road Warrior, they're movies about a post-apocalyptic world where groups fight and delete each other for scraps and for resources after a natural disaster and or nuclear disaster has taken place. There's a lot of crazy stuff going on. It is not coincidental. Please don't try to tell me that all of these catastrophes are coincidental. Beginning in spring of this year, a tanker crashes into a bridge, which basically takes out a whole port. That captain is Ukrainian. Ukraine is a CIA country, basically. Then before that, we had the train crash and dump all of its chemicals into the river in Ohio. And that just happened to be an area where they were about to test some programs to chip people. Then we have these hurricanes, one into New Orleans, then Helene into red states, destroying the whole area that BlackRock and Vanguard and Albemarle all want to get into to mine lithium. Then Milton crashes into Florida. Now we've still got more hurricanes. And then just a day after Milton happens, a pipeline in Houston explodes, all while Chinese and terrorist agents are flowing through the border. Meanwhile, Biden is in the White House trying to make it look like anybody that talks about weather modification is a nut job when we've got all the proof that he's just a Chinese agent. We're going to, today we're going to look at even more proof. I've been doing nothing but videos on these contrived hurricanes, and today we're going to do the best evidence that I've seen. I did not know this. In my last video, this video right here, go check it out. We discussed the NEXRAD Doppler radars all throughout the U.S. were able to steer these storms. Most people don't know that there's electrogravitic component to these storms, and we're going to see in this video. It's been sent to me. I haven't seen it yet. I've seen the radar video of this, but I have not seen this video. We're going to see where all of these stations are turned on and off to actually steer these storms. I've known about this for a very long time. The stuff I talk about, people look at me like I'm crazy, but that's because I'm so far ahead of everybody else. Because my BS detector is able to go off, whereas other people's are not. So we're going to watch this video, very, very good video. We're going to see more evidence of electromagnetic manipulation of these storms, and then we're going to discuss it. Here we go. This is a fantastic independent news group named Redacted.
Is the United States government manipulating and even worse, controlling the weather using NEXRAD? Is the United States government manipulating and even worse, controlling the weather using NEXRAD Doppler radar installations? It sounds like a conspiracy theory until you realize the U.S. government has these installations all over the United States. Watch.
Was Hurricane Helene's path and behavior just the result of natural processes and climate patterns, or was it manipulated? The circular blue flashes seen in this video are frequency transmissions from the NEXRAD network of transmitter installations. All available science evidence makes clear that atmospheric frequency transmissions can and do have a repelling effect on air masses, especially if and when the air masses have been seeded with electrically conductive nanoparticles. The brighter the blue flash from a frequency transmission installation, the more pronounced and powerful the repelling effect on any air mass or storm in the vicinity will be. Where there are no blue flashes, there is no transmission, thus no repelling effect, thus no resistance for a migrating storm. Translation: a migrating storm will be hindered from moving toward frequency transmissions and will easily migrate in a direction with no transmissions. So again, I ask, was Hurricane Helene's path and behavior just an act of nature, or was it engineered? You decide.
Well, the voice you heard there is Dane Wigington. He is the lead researcher and administrator for the website geoengineeringwatch.org. He's the executive producer of the groundbreaking climate engineering documentary called The Dimming. I encourage all of you to watch it. Dane has devoted the last 20 years of his life to constant research on the issue of covert global climate engineering operations and the effort to expose and halt these criminals. Dane Wigington joins me now. Dane, great to see you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Clayton. Thank you for your voice in this most dire issue that too few are aware of. And regarding climate engineering, it's not speculation or theory or hypothesis. It's a matter of the historical record with mountains of documents to back up the fact that these programs have been ongoing for decades.
Ongoing for decades. And I think a lot of Americans are like, this sounds like a conspiracy theory. It's absolutely not. You broke a big story this week that lawmakers who were briefed on these weather weapons concluded that what happened in North Carolina, Hurricane Helene, was engineered by the Department of Defense. Can you elaborate on that?
Geoengineering Watch is communicating with congressmen from the Carolinas, from Connecticut, from Tennessee, and they are all very aware of these programs being ongoing and operational. And I want to delineate this. There's a very marked difference between, quote, weather modification, which many people are familiar with, single engine, propeller driven airplane with a few flares on the wings. That is not this. With climate engineering, we have, for example, a KC-135 military tanker can distribute 100 tons of toxic material into the skies to seed cloud moisture in a single payload. So they're two very different animals, and the local publicized weather modification operations are simply used as a smokescreen to mask the unimaginably larger climate intervention operations. So, and again, we have, going back decades, congressional documents at geoengineeringwatch.org. One is 800 pages long, outlining the scope and scale of these operations, even going back to the 70s and before, and the intergovernmental cooperation, even between governments with otherwise adversarial relations, is stated as such in this document. Document calls for blanket legal immunity for anyone and everyone involved with these programs. So again, we have film footage of these aircraft at altitude, nozzles visible, turning on and off. This is not condensation we see in our skies. All military tankers and all commercial aircraft are outfitted with a high bypass turbofan jet engine, jet-powered fan. 90% of the air that moves through that engine is not combusted. So we should see, except under rare circumstances, we should see nothing behind these aircraft. And we're just asking people to investigate the data, connect the dots. This is absolutely ongoing.
So let's talk about, I want to talk about Helene in a minute here, but right now we've got Hurricane Milton bearing down on Florida, and overnight we see this small sort of secondary storm now in front of it, almost like a twin storm about to hit Florida. Then overnight we also saw these massive wildfires breaking out in the Tetons in Wyoming. So a lot of Americans are so frustrated right now. They're sitting there saying, why would our government do this to us? First of all, let's talk about Milton. Is there any weather modification by the government being used or directing of this storm into Florida from your evidence?
Short answer, yes. And if I could back up to why would our government do this? Why wouldn't they do this when this has been business as usual for decades? If we look at what the Washington Post published all the way back in 1977, that the U.S. military had conducted no less than 239 open-air biological tests on innocent, unknowing U.S. civilians. That's what we know about going back that far. If we look at the nuclear bomb detonations in Nevada, we have peer-reviewed study now to prove that those detonations eventually caused no less than 500,000 downstream deaths from the fallout for U.S. civilians. That's peer-reviewed study. So again, for those that can't imagine that the people who actually control our government, which I would argue is not any elected official, it's those who control the flow of money, this is business as usual. And why wouldn't they do this? Why wouldn't they use weather as a covert weapon of control? If we look all the way back, Clayton, to film footage of Lyndon Johnson in 1962, former U.S. President Lyndon Johnson, 1962, on film, on the record, ranting like a lunatic, stating we had the power to control the world's cloud layer then, 62 years ago, and, quote, he who controls the weather controls the world. So again, this is not speculation. And we have other governments like China openly announcing their massive weather modification operations. And yet if you bring the subject up here in the US, suddenly you're marginalized. That needs to change. In regards to Milton, there's no question it's being manipulated. And there's a global network of frequency transmitters that have a repelling effect on the air mass that is heavily seeded with electrically conductive elements. And if you saw the track of Milton, it got hung up a bit on the Yucatan Peninsula. There's a massive transmitter in Cancun, and we recorded the transmissions from that, trying to bump that storm back onto track. And again, once it gets near enough to landfall in the US, where the NEXRAD network then becomes the controlling element, we've recorded this again and again and again. Even with hurricanes like Harvey, for example, Clayton, you might remember 7 days in advance, they seemed to know where it was going to go and that it was going to sit there for days. How could they possibly know that unless that's the plan? And we recorded Harvey. We recorded the actual transmissions with Harvey, Ian, Maria, Michael, all these hurricanes and their interaction with the transmitters. This is patented technology. So again, it's not like we're speculating.
No, speculating at all. So these NEXRAD, we showed at the very beginning here what happened with Helene. When you have these NEXRAD frequency transmitters, where are these? Are these on military bases, these installations? What exactly do they look like? And how are they being operated? And I guess by whom? Is it the Department of Defense?
What we know from, for example, congressional documents is there are many agencies involved with the overall operations of these programs, but they're all compartmentalized. So the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. There's certainly central coordination for the NEXRAD network, and that's visible from the manner in which you can see these transmitters energizing. They're clearly completely coordinated. We do have some of the transmitters on bases, but some are not on bases. And it's even with what we think are just new cell towers going up everywhere, we know from those installing those towers that many of those installations have 10 times more power being supplied to them than they need for communications. And we can see their effect on water vapor loops. They are affecting the flow of precipitation. They are absolutely a part of these operations. And Clayton, if you've ever seen the herringbone patterns, the perfectly synchronized or aligned herringbone patterns in the clouds in the sky, have you ever seen that? And sometimes you can see those in perpendicular directions, and that's indicative of overlapping transmissions from different transmitters. You can't have that atmospherically otherwise. And so we have the entire meteorological community, their so-called science community, pretending that there's all these new cloud formations, that all these anomalous phenomenon we see in our skies are just something new that nobody ever noticed for 100 years, and they name 18 new clouds going back several years. And I mean, the blatantness with which these programs are ongoing is staggering. And people think, well, everyone would be lining up to talk about this, right? The experts would all be coming out of the shadows to admit to this. What happens to whistleblowers? What happened to Assange? What happened to John Carrico, the person who blew the whistle on the illegal torture programs? He's the only one that went to jail for it. So no, people aren't going to be lining up. And we have right now, Clayton, we have an illegal federal gag order on all National Weather Service and all NOAA employees, the nation's weathermen. Why in the world would you have an illegal gag order on those agencies, forbidding them from discussing any of the agency operations?
Well, and Americans sitting there saying, why would they do this? Why would the government direct this into, we can talk about Hurricane Helene now, into this section of Western North Carolina? And if you follow Occam's razor, the shortest, most direct response makes sense, right? And if it's the Department of Defense directing these weather weapons, and they don't want Trump voters to vote for Trump, I mean, maybe that's the direct line here. Why would they do that? Well, would it be to end the wars in Ukraine? Would it be to end the wars in the Middle East? They're going to be put out of business, tens of billions of dollars at stake if Trump becomes president. I mean, is that a leap too far?
No, I don't think it is. I would just simply add that there are other layers as well. So we have Piedmont Lithium in North Carolina that was hemorrhaging hundreds of millions of dollars because of the roadblock of the owners that were not cooperating, did not want that mine to proceed. We have Piedmont Lithium's contracts with the DOD in 2025 that were coming due. So we have the DOD pursuing that lithium. And again, why would we think that this kind of operation wouldn't be conducted by those who actually control the power in Washington? And I, again, would argue that's those ultimately who print the money. And we have other historical records of this, Clayton. For example, immediately after 9/11, we had General Wesley Clark, the former NATO Supreme Commander, with a list of countries that were to be targeted because of that event, a list that clearly existed before that event ever occurred. Subsequently, every one of those countries underwent a once in 1,000 year drought. That's statistically impossible without climate intervention. And to back this up, we have the leaders of those countries, in the case of Iran, on the floor of the UN, stating emphatically, NATO is cutting off our precipitation. And they can see with their weather monitoring equipment what's going on upstream. So again, why would we think this isn't going on? We could go back further to Project Popeye in Vietnam in the 60s, where the US military was so successful at the flow of precipitation over that country that by the 70s, there were international treaties forbidding weather warfare. Not that anybody pays any attention to that. So again, for Americans that think that this wouldn't be ongoing or we don't have the technology for this, it's simply ridiculous. We have patents going back for weather modification all the way back to the 1800s. We have about 200 at geoengineeringwatch.org, 200 plus. It's an extensive list of patents and new ones all the time for everything from hurricane modification to precipitation control to chemical ice nucleation. Clayton, have you've seen how much hail is falling that's the size of baseball and softballs of late?
Yeah.
That's not nature.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. So many people posting on social media saying they've never seen storms like this before. They've never seen, they're filming it continuously for minutes at a time with lightning going off every few seconds. Traditional thunderstorms, you see lightning maybe every few minutes. But for it to be going off, it looks like something out of a movie. It looks like something out of a Lord of the Rings trailer or something like that. So we're seeing all sorts of different patterns, and people are saying that they've never seen storms like this. Are they right,
No.
or are they just conspiracy theorists?
I mean, again, this is a matter of the emperor has no clothes. Again, we need to use our sense of reason. It's absolutely occurring. And as far as the excessive lightning now, we have an ionized atmosphere. It's much more electrically conductive. These particulates are electrically conductive. And we're talking about, based on our lab tests, working with the University of Minnesota, hundreds of lab tests over that state, and extrapolating the amount of climate engineering elements in the precipitation and projecting that globally, it appears as if somewhere in the range of 40 to 60 million tons of toxic electrically conductive nanoparticles are being dispersed into our skies. That creates more static buildup. Again, more electrical conductivity in the clouds. Now we have the clouds being blasted with microwave transmission. So it's the atmosphere is being treated as a physics lab and a war zone at this point. And on the chemical ice nucleating elements, which are used to temporarily and toxically cool down surface temperatures in various regions. In fact, that happened. That's another layer for Helene. We had an anomalously less warm region in that part of the U.S., while the rest of the U.S., for example, where I live in Northern California, it's been 100 degrees plus for about 6 months with no rain. And the no rain part is absolutely a result of climate engineering as well. We can see what they're doing on satellite imagery. It cuts off the precipitation to the west, and that plugs into the wildfire scenario. All these puzzle pieces fit together completely. And on the chemical ice nucleation part, if your listeners search Lake Michigan ice balls, for example, look at the photos of what we don't see on Matrix television, 75-pound perfectly spherical ice balls covering the shores of Lake Michigan. And this is happening in the Baltic Sea, the Arctic. That's what happens with a chemically nucleated element. And for the massive hailstones, when you create this ice nucleation process far earlier, it builds up far faster. That's why you end up with that. And that's why now insurance companies suddenly are canceling everybody for hail damage, because now it's off the charts, just like the lightning.
Unbelievable. So let's talk about Milton here. And Dane, I'll get you, I want to be respectful of your time. Milton, right? This is about to hit. The weather modification here, you've seen evidence of that, the manipulation using these NEXRAD radar systems off of Cancun to get it back on track. It looked like it was going south more towards Cancun in that direction. You say that it was pushed back to the north. And just can you talk about that? And then also, what is the goal with Florida? Why Florida, right? I mean, at the end of the day, there's got to be a purpose for this. So why are they targeting Tampa specifically? Is there some reason that you've been able to identify, or is that not that's in the realm of speculation at this point?
At geoengineering.org, we are careful to only state what we can back up with data. So in regard to the agendas and objectives, there are likely many, and behind closed doors, whatever is going on there for the ultimate goal is difficult to state. What we can state with certainty is these operations are real, ongoing, they're patented processes, they're affecting these storms. And Clayton, if we go one step further, we've had for decades patented technologies to suppress these storms, to stop the convection. We have products like Dynamat designed to reduce the convection and pull the moisture to the surface at minimum, at absolute minimum. If they didn't want these storms to happen, they would not happen. And we're not stating on the spawning of these storms, the oceans are superheating. Nature can certainly spawn these storms, although with atmospheric pressure zone manipulation, which is absolutely ongoing. Again, for decades, this technology has existed. HAARP, for example, in Alaska, many of your followers may know what that is. That's an ionosphere heater. It's a weapon of mass destruction. It's not some benign research facility. When you can transmit 3.5 million watts, 3.6 million watts into the electrically charged ionosphere, which causes an electrical chain reaction, superheats that layer of the atmosphere, causing the atmosphere to expand up and down, you can create and manipulate pressure zones on the surface. That in turn can affect storms like Milton or Helene. So they have the ability to make or break these storms however they form, and they have the ability to direct them. And the reason that normally now, Clayton, you've probably heard the term rapid intensification a lot lately with these storms.
Right.
So what we see now is an attempt to keep the storms from organizing too much too early, where they're over large bodies of water like the Gulf of Mexico, because they're much harder to steer. And perhaps we saw that with Milton, because as you know, Milton spun up much faster and stronger than they initially forecast. And that may have made it harder to steer, why it leaned to the southeast and hung up on the Yucatan Peninsula, and why they had to bump it off because it spun up more than they anticipated, perhaps. So again, there's two layers of the transmission manipulation. There's ionosphere heaters like HAARP, of which there's about 100 around the globe. HAARP's the biggest and the most powerful. And there's the NEXRAD network that manipulates from the ground level. And these, again, two separate aspects, but all frequency manipulation and all doing what to the atmosphere? How do we know the overall effects? And what we do know from climate engineering sprayed dispersals in our sky. And again, these are aerosols. This is not condensation. Encourage people to look at videos we have at geoengineeringwatch.org, up close, taken at altitude, nozzles visible, turning dispersions on and off. End of discussion. This is not condensation. So those particles have an oxidizing effect in the ozone layer, which is absolutely imploding.
Yeah. A lot to unpack there. When people send me these videos, I take notes. Man, a lot to talk about there. He mentioned the Tetons. The Tetons are on fire. California's on fire. Hurricanes are coming out of everywhere. The hurricane that went to New Orleans in September hauled ass across the Gulf and then stopped just right on top of New Orleans and hit it with its most powerful portion of it, the eye wall. I would like to see the NEXRAD video of that, probably all turned on at the around the storm, more inland to keep it there, and then it continued on. These things have stages. So there's other guys on YouTube that are talking about super tankers that are in the Gulf of Mexico, right about the spot where the hurricane that hit New Orleans started and Milton started as well. And they were looking at the transponders of these super tankers, and they were only doing 1 or 2 knots per hour in the Gulf. They weren't like taking oil somewhere. They were just sitting around in the Gulf. Tens of them, maybe hundreds of them. And the stages of what we're seeing here, the potential stages and weaponization of these hurricanes is this. Super tankers can boil the water through their burners and put it up in the sky. If you got tens of these doing that, they're super tankers. They could do it probably for years with all the oil that they have on board. They put all of this massive humidity and water into the air. It all coalesces there. Maybe some tankers or whatever fly around it, dump a bunch of metallic ferrous material. Then HAARP and the other electromagnetic stations get involved, start spitting it. Michio Kaku, the physicist, said that they could steer these with lasers. They've got trillion-watt lasers. This thing moves in. They said that it started to go toward Cancun. One of their radars pushed it back on course. And then this thing ran right into Florida, and they were asking why Americans would ask why they're doing this, because it's the election season. They did this the last election season during 2020, same thing. Last few days of October of 2020, a hurricane hits New Orleans. Very, very rare, if never been done before, that hurricanes are that late. Totally disrupted everything before the election. It's disrupting everything in red states in Florida and Carolina, and North Carolina immediately changed its voting rules after this because they said, oh, we've got an emergency. So we've got to do mail-in ballots. So here we go. Here we go with the mail-in ballots. They're going to try to mail in the ballots, fake all these ballots and send them in and lose a battleground state. So we're seeing the stages here. Then once this thing moves and gets into the United States, we saw the map there where all of the radars are pushing it. And then when Helene gets to the target area, all of the radars turn on all around it to keep it spinning in that area. Meanwhile, they're probably got other things starting tornadoes, blowing up dams. In my last video, I showed HAARP technology making the water spike. There was spikes in the water because of some resonant frequency or some type of electromagnetic energy that it was hitting the lake with in Alaska. We see that being done in the Carolina area as well just before the storm. So they're hitting these poor people with all kinds of electromagnetic energy. So we've got the stages of these things. Put all the massive water in the air, spike it with ferrous material, spin it with HAARP and other weapons of mass destruction, he called them. Get these things spinning and then maneuver them and then keep them in one spot. What is that? A 1,000 year, maybe if never, hurricane that hit the Asheville area? And then we see with FEMA, they're not allowing civilian helicopter people to go help their own people. They're stopping them from helping them. They're confiscating the supplies. Because why would they engineer this thing just to have people save them and keep them from what they're trying to do? They're trying to whack out that area so they can start mining. By the way, all this has to do with war. Trump is a big problem for them. He doesn't want war. He's going to get us out of war. He's going to get us out of the Middle East. I know the plan in which he's going to use to end that Middle East conflict within days. He's going to pull out of Ukraine. Ukraine is just a big CIA swamp creature. BlackRock has got $500 billion invested in the Ukraine. They've got investments in these mines. And if they've got a war plan, they're going to need all this lithium for all the batteries and all the stuff and all the people. The Democrats have got a plan to start conscripting people by February. 1 million people by the end of December of 2025. So if you value your children, you better get off your asses and watch this stuff, learn, and do something about it. I have no children. I've lived my life. I don't care. I won't get sent. These poor children aren't ready for college even, let alone war. I joined the military when I was 17. I'm seeing all my friends with their kids. They couldn't join the Boy Scouts at 17, let alone get thrown in the military and get shot at and blown up and get screamed at. It's crazy what's going on. Trump is super bad for them, and they need to stop this. It's very, very, very crazy. It is a weapon of mass destruction. It's, and I hope to God, I pray, if I were you, I'd start getting ready because Mad Max time is about to start. Hopefully it'll just be a few days or a few weeks when the shenanigans happen, but it might be months. I'm pretty sure that when we watch this type of stuff and we see what they're doing, we see that they have no qualms about crashing the grid just before winter. Do you have enough fuel to, what about all the people in apartments? Once you have no electricity, it doesn't matter if you got gas in your furnace and gas is provided to your heater. They won't, the igniters are electric. I learned that in Syracuse, New York one night, where it went like 20 degrees below zero and no power. You guys better start prepping and get three. I put a video up of FBI agents telling people that they should get 3 to 4 months worth of food ready, arm themselves, and make friends with their neighbors. I think this guy knows what he's talking about. These guys have no qualms with crashing the grid just before wintertime to create more chaos. Look what they're doing now. These storms have an electromagnetic, electrogravitic component to them. If you know anything about astronomy, you know about the red spot in Jupiter. That thing has been spinning. Astronomers have been observing that for over 300 years, the red spot of Jupiter. What is spinning that mass? A big ocean on Jupiter? No, it's gases. It's electromagnetic energy. Saturn and Jupiter pump out so much energy, too much energy, more energy than you would think. They're not stars. They pump out a lot of energy. And this electromagnetic energy is spinning that great red spot. What is that material that's red? It's probably, let's just guess. Ferrous oxide? Iron? Think about that. Iron is magnetically, electrically conductive. Magnets are made out of iron, right? So what we may be observing on Jupiter is a big, massive ferrous oxide cloud that's being spun electromagnetically. And the reason why I bring that up is because that's probably what they're doing. They just looked at Jupiter and observed that and said, oh, it's possible. Back in the 50s, they were probably thinking this. Put magnetic ferrous material into a storm, spin it electromagnetically, electrogravitically, and Bob's your uncle. One of the reasons why we have hurricanes in the summer, a potential reason might be because that end of the earth is the one that's tilted closest to the sun. The sun is the largest body to us, and there's more gravity being involved here. These things always occur around 15 degrees, naturally, around 15 degrees latitude. They come from the Sahara, they form from the dust, and then they come up, unless they're made like these. The Great Red Spot on Jupiter, I think, is around 15 degrees latitude. And then there's Uranus and Neptune. They have great spots as well, and they're also around 15 degrees latitude. So what is it, oceans on there that are creating those? No, it's electromagnetic energy. These things are electromagnetic, electrogravitic in nature. That's why tornadoes spin at 300 miles per hour. That's why they lift things up. That's why you see weird anomalies at tornadoes, straw stuck in a tree, cars being lifted. There's people that have said that during some of these tornadoes, they've felt levitational effects. So I know we're going out on a limb here, but this is what we talk about in Ultra Top Secret. This is exotic technology. This is what we talk about. Special operations, exotic technology. Trump created the Space Force. He probably needed to create a whole new military force out of cloth because they were asking, why? A lot of these agencies have been subverted and infiltrated. The military may have been as well. That might have been a reason why Trump had to create a Space Force. Go watch my last video where a whistleblower was talking about another array from Antarctica. And there's all kinds of video of some type of effect coming off of Antarctica affecting weather. This guy in my last video was talking about platforms in space. We see that happening with directed energy weapons being fired at Maui and California. We see that every time they do a smart city initiative on one of these cities like Asheville or Tampa or Maui, suddenly it's hit by a natural disaster. What are the odds of that? It's time to wake up. I've known about this for a very long time. I'm just a guy. I'm just a guy that saw what was going and finally just said I couldn't sit back on the sidelines anymore and created this channel to talk about what's happening so I can make a difference. I know these things, a lot of people don't, and I should help. And that's what I'm doing. These things are electromagnetic. The last video I did, the guy was talking about a space force. Solar Warden, I will be discussing that a lot when I start talking about UFOs and secret space programs. Secret space programs are for real. And so what I'm getting at is a lot of these directed energy weapons and lasers might be firing from space and staring these things. Machio Kaku, the world famous physicist, said that back in the early 2000s. He was talking about trillion-watt lasers that could steer hurricanes. And in my next video, I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to have that clip where Machio Kiko is talking about that. So we're talking about space stuff. I hope to God that Trump is able to do something about this. And we're getting to the wire. We've only got 25, a little more than 3 weeks before the election. And I'm telling you that all of this is building up to something. I'd get prepared if I were you. I'm going to be doing 1 or 2 videos a day on preparedness and what's going on. So that's it. I could talk about this all day. We got to get out of here. We will see you on the next Ultra Top Secret. Please like, share, and subscribe. I don't make a single dollar off of this. I only get paid in likes, shares, and subscribes. So without further ado, we will get on out of here. And please get prepared. We will see you on the next Ultra Top Secret.